Good morning, everybody. I am Paul-Luc Bonenfant. Welcome to another video, and Merry Christmas for everybody who celebrates, because Christmas was yesterday. It's Sunday morning, and it's a beautiful day where I live, so I hope everybody's getting out and enjoying driving. You know, I had a car meet this morning, and it was great. So today I just wanted to get into why I personally chose a 996 over a 997 Cayman, more specifically a 987.1 Cayman S. Because really the competitors between the 911 and the Cayman, I feel like, are the 996.1 or even .2, depending on example, and the 987.1 Cayman S or 987.2 base Cayman. But even those are a little bit, were, at least when I bought my car in September of 2020, they were more out of the price range, and they've continued to appreciate, but the 996s really have come up. And you don't really find many bad example 987.2s out there. So for the purpose of this video, we're really going to be comparing a 987.1 Cayman S to a 996 Porsche 911 base Carrera. So I chose a 996, specifically an early build 1999 Porsche 911, and those are the cars that are equipped with the factory limited slip differential, the amber front and rear headlights and tail lights, slightly different interior specification, and supposedly better build quality because they were hand built alongside the 993s. My car is a March of 1998 build date car, very early on, and I got it with 150,000 miles on it. It was questionably taken care of previous to the owner who had it before me, but for the purpose of this video, we're going to be looking a little bit more generally on why I chose the 996. So first off, the engine placement, because that makes a massive difference in servicing it yourself, parts and everything. I'd say that it's pretty easy to do an oil change on both of them, and it's not very different to do an oil change on a Cayman versus a 996. With Porsche, sort of the earlier the 911 or the earlier the car, the easier it is to service because of all the engine electronics. With the 996, the engine in the rear is very easy to access, some parts of it, especially towards like the airbox and everything. As long as you know how to take off the airbox, you can reach quite a bit of the top end of the car, and anything that you would need to get under the car, as long as you can lift up the rear, you can get underneath and sort of play around with whatever isn't covered. And with the Caymans, it is easy, but for a lot of things that you would be more easily able to do on the 911, you would have to take off the engine cover for example, spark plugs or anything like that you could just open the engine bay in the 996. And the other thing is you don't have to risk spilling oil or coolant on your interior when you're doing more easy services, you know? So as far as service goes, the engine placement in the 911 makes it easier, a lot easier actually, to do your own DIY service. And that goes especially for the Boxsters, but for the Cayman, it's easier than the Boxster, but still quite difficult compared to a 996. And correct me if I'm wrong in the comments on any of these things, by the way, but as far as I'm concerned, being sort of new to servicing my own Porsche, it seemed less daunting to be able to access the engine. Number two is parts availability. So the Caymans being a little more rare than the 996s, there seems to be, at least with quick searches on the internet, far less aftermarket parts and far less customizability and far less just parts availability for things that are specific to the Cayman. A lot of parts are shared between the Caymans and 911s of the early generations, but there are some things that are specific to the Cayman that are more difficult to find than they are for the 911. For example, there's a lot of things specifically for the M96 engine that are just very readily available because a lot of times it's expected that certain failures will happen on these engines, and therefore you can go online and pretty much find anything you would need in order to service your 996. I already own a questionably easily to fix car. My 1992 Dodge Stealth, it's a pain to find parts for, and Porsche is good because you can pretty much order any part that was ever put on any Porsche from Porsche themselves. It's just ungodly expensive. So having that OEM aftermarket sort of scene going on with the 911 was a big selling point for me. I'm sure you can find anything you would need for a Cayman. It is just that tiny bit easier to find things and access things on the 911 when it comes to parts and service that led me to it. For someone like young and starting out like me, it seemed like a much more proven way of doing things. At least there's not only more of them, but they are the Porsche, so it's easier sort of to find things that you would need. The second thing was sort of the classic and unloved status of the 996. It is the unloved and ugly generation of 911, but it is nonetheless a 911. So for me, it almost appealed to me that it was the underdog. Everybody knows that a Cayman is great. It's a superior design from the get-go with having a mid-engine design. But the 996 has that sort of charm to me of having its quirky character of being the unloved 911. You know, the earlier build, the better, I guess, on these 996s, because the more quirks and weird, you know, late 90s Porsche stuff you'll find in them that you aren't gonna get on the more commercialized, you might say, Caymans. I find that at least for starters, the 996 has got that like, that's a 996. You either love it or you don't. And for me, I love it. Number 3 is it's analog. And the Cayman is a very analog car. Don't get me wrong. So are the 997s. But the 996, especially, like I said, these early 996s are incredibly analog cars. My car doesn't have traction control. It has a factory limited slip differential. With things that I've stripped out of it, it weighs 2,700 pounds. And it's got the very mechanical feeling early 996 motor with the 5 timing chains and and whatnot. The motor itself from the early 996s differs a lot in the engine design from even the 3.4 liter motors that went into the 987s. It has a very early variocam design where it's less streamlined in the way that the valves change timing, and something about it, it feels very, not like VTEC obviously, but it's a characterful engine with its flaws, but it's a very characterful engine. For me, it appeals to me how analog these cars are. The big one, especially with driving dynamics, is the cable throttle. Anyone who's driven an early 996 versus like a 997 or even a 991, the shifter feel for the manuals is really different. The earlier 996s feel like a 993 shifter, where it feels a little heavier. It's a little more solid feeling, whereas the later ones and the Cayman shifters are a lot more notchy feeling, but they're a lot more plasticky feeling also, and not necessarily plasticky. They're less heavy feeling, in my opinion. So that may be a personal preference thing, but the 996, especially early ones, are incredibly analog cars. They are very close in mechanical feeling, driving dynamics to, depending on who you ask, to a 993 than they would a 997. That gets me to my next point. It's a 911. It has a rear engine, and the driving dynamics of car with a mid-engine versus a rear engine are completely different. You can argue that you could take the platform of the 987 and build it out to be much faster on a track than you can with a 996, or you can take the deficit that it has to a 911 away fairly easily by just a few upgrades here and there. But the unique driving characteristics of having a rear engine, having less weight over the front, and having everything where Porsche has tried to make it work for so many years, for me, gives it a driving character that the Cayman doesn't have. But what the Cayman does have is just very perfect balance. Everything feels very perfect and very connected. But with the 911, it has this character to it, which appealed to me, at least to start out as a Porsche owner. It has the appeal of when you go and you look at it from afar, you see that classic 911 silhouette. And shoot me for saying this, I think that the 996 is a better looking car than the Cayman, not because of the design of it. I think that the Cayman has a better, more flowy, more beautiful design to it. I think that the 911, if you are a Porsche fan, it's more of a familiar shape to it. It has the 911 shape where the rear is unmistakable from the front, and you look at it and you immediately say, that's a 911. That appealed to me because it is every bit as 911 as any other 911 without having to pay that premium. So for what I wanted out of a car, out of a Porsche, it appealed to me more so than the Cayman. And the last one I'm going to talk about is budget. Now, in my specific case, I was able to find like a unicorn of a deal, you might say, because it was a well mechanically sorted car in pretty bad cosmetic shape, which led it to be much less expensive than other 996s at sort of the very start of the appreciation curve. The Caymans at the time were around the same price, but starting to be a little bit more expensive. And so I couldn't find that right balance of a mechanically sorted Cayman that was in bad cosmetic shape that I'd be able to sort of pick up, you know? Or at least not a Cayman S, which a base 996 versus a base Cayman there's a lot more torque, a lot more power. The 911 feels a lot more powerful. And so for me, what I was looking for, it was either a Cayman S, but I just couldn't find that balance of it needing the love and the work that I was budgeting to put forward into it, while simultaneously being in bad enough shape that it would be sort of a comfortable price for me to go and take the risk on. I guess when it came to timing, I was led towards a 996 over it. And I should probably say, for all of the Cayman owners out there who've watched this video, I want to eventually have a Cayman in my garage. I want to eventually own a Cayman, and as well as a 911. I hopefully will never have to sell this car behind me, and when I'm older, we'll be able to add on a Cayman, because it really is an incredible car, and it's the start of something extremely special in Porsche history. I mean, look what they're doing with the Cayman now. It's just incredible how well and how amazing that Cayman platform it really is. I have a lot of respect for Cayman owners. I have a lot of respect for the Cayman itself, but I always dreamt about owning a 911, and this is the biggest thing. This is sort of the biggest reason why I bought the 911, and for a lot of people I've talked to, this is the biggest reason why they went for a 911, a 996 over a 987 Cayman. If I were to have bought a 987 Cayman, I would have still looked at a 911 driving by and been like, wow, that's a 911. That's the car that I've dreamed of owning. And I would have felt like I bought the Cayman because I couldn't buy the 911. But buying this 996 and falling in love with it, I feel like I've made the right choice, because I don't look at other 911s and think, oh, I wish I had that car over mine. When I'm driving other cars or testing out other people's cars and things, I always think, wow, I'm so glad that I bought the car that I did. It has the perfect blend of analog and being an underdog and being a 911 at the same time, and having the rear engine and me being able to service it even though I'm not the most qualified and all that. It has the right blend of everything to be the right car for me. And again, this video is just about my personal preference. There is always that fear that I would have regretted buying the Cayman. So if you are in the market like I was for your first Porsche, and you're looking at an early Cayman or an early 996, I won't tell you which way to go, but test out them both and think to yourself, which car will I, 14 months after buying, think, I'm so glad that I chose to go this route? And the answer might be either one. I could have went with the Cayman and said, screw it, I will never want to touch a 911 for the rest of my life. I made the right choice. But I know which way I chose, and I hope for you guys' sake that you don't have as much of a struggle with it as I did, but it's a good struggle to have, to be honest. we're all lucky to be in any sort of Porsche at any time. So thank you guys for joining me for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, got some insight out of it into how I made my purchasing decision if you're about to, or maybe got some confirmation bias on your own buying decision. So Merry Christmas again. I'll see you guys in the next one, and Happy New Year. I'll see you guys before New Year. I'll make another video. But if I don't, Happy New Year. Bye, camera.